Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. The purpose of this evening is to meet Andy Street, who is the Mayor for the West Midlands, and it's an opportunity to ask him questions. And today is specifically an opportunity for the people of Stourbridge to ask their questions. Now, before we kick off, I just want to do a tiny bit of housekeeping. The event will last up to an hour. The event is actually being recorded, but it's not going out live. But we may well be doing clips for social media. And if there are any questions that remain unanswered, the moderator will put the email address in the chat function. And please do email your questions there. We want to ensure we answer all of your questions. So, Andy, just over to you. I just wondered if you'd like to say a few words.
Yes, of course, Suzanne. So first of all, I want to thank you for hosting this. I know you're doing it from your parliamentary place in London. So thank you for joining us back in the Midlands tonight. And of course, thank everyone who's come on the line to do this. It would be lovely if we were doing this in person, but we all understand why we can't. But I'm obviously very keen that, just as I did for 3 years before the pandemic struck, that we go out and about and give the opportunity for residents to ask me whatever they want. I can probably anticipate the first few questions, first couple that you might ask on some big subjects, but after then, nothing is staged, it's all spontaneous. So I always have that little bit of trepidation in my tummy about this, but it's usually a good exchange of views, and I'll just promise to answer as honestly as I can, basically.
Oh, thanks so much, Andy. I've done a couple of these with you in previous lives as well, for myself, and they are really good and really informative. And I've always found that you've answered very, very honestly. So the first question, it's something that's actually incredibly close to my heart and to my constituents, which of course is the precious Greenbelt. And here in Stourbridge, we have a significant amount of Greenbelt land. And so the first question I have for you is, what have you been doing to protect these precious Greenbelt areas?
So it's a good day to ask me that question, Suzanne, because actually only this morning I was down in Stourbridge looking at a very precious piece of it's not actually green belt, it's green fields, and that's the Corbett Meadow. And it was lovely just to come and see, and I lend my support to the campaign to maintain that there in Abercup. So, but wider than that, over the last 4 years, I've given a really clear pledge that there should be no green belt around, not just Stourbridge, all of the Dudley boundary. None of it should be lost at all. And that's very clear, because in my view, there is more than enough brownfield land to redevelop. So we do not need to go onto the green belt to meet the housing needs of Dudley. And I should be really clear, this isn't because I'm in some way against housing development, quite the opposite, actually. Our young people in particular need new housing to be built. And we have, over the last few years, doubled the number of homes being built across the West Midlands. 17,000 last year, from less than 8,000 back in 2013-14. So we built the homes. It's a question of where we build them, and overwhelmingly on brownfield land. So an absolute categoric pledge from me to protect the Greenbelt, whether it frankly be the Corbett Meadow, or you and I were out just a few weeks ago down at, is it called Little Bromwich Lane, right on the far corner of your patch. And again, making the very clear commitment that it is not necessary, and the council should not be approving development proposals in the land adjoining the current built-up area.
Absolutely fantastic. And I can also say your commitment goes way back to about 2017 when I first met you, and we stood in the field talking about the protection of Greenbelt. So it's not just something you're talking about now, it's something that you've always been committed to, ever since I've known you, Andy.
Well, it's probably worth just dwelling on that, actually, because I'd forgotten that link. I think of you as the Stourbridge MP. But Suzanne was also the big campaigner in Sutton when we had the last mayoral election campaign, and a campaign called the Fields. And actually that campaign was lost despite everyone's valiant efforts, and Birmingham City Council agreed to develop that land around Sutton Coldfield, the Warmley site of Sutton. And I just reflected on thinking, this is wrong. And I sort of said to myself, we can't let this happen again. And if I'm honest, Suzanne, it was your campaign that really solidified my mind that it was so wrong. Because let's just think about it. The Greenbelt is gone, is gone, is gone. It never comes back, and all of the environmental damage that's done from that. But there's the other side of it as well. While we were building on the edge of the city like that, we weren't tackling some of the long derelict areas. And what I am so proud of in the last 4 years is we've almost forced developers to concentrate on the tougher derelict areas rather than taking the easy pickings of building on the Greenbelt. And just this last week, another scheme in Dudley, Cookley Works, agreed, where the combined authorities putting in funding from our Brownfield fund that will bring that back. And of course, the one that's most exciting is right in the middle of Dudley, the big Portersfield development, which again, we've put funding in. And just so your listeners know, the funding has been that I've actually, so the way to say I is right in that sentence, that I negotiated with central government a housing deal, and we've now got over £450 million to regenerate derelict sites across the West Midlands. And it's because of that that we can give our commitment not to develop Greenbelt around the conurbation.
Thanks for that answer, Andy. That leads me very nicely into the next question I have for you, which is a lot has been made about town centre regeneration recently, and I know in Stourbridge we're all very proud of our high streets and town centre. But what is being done to aid this regeneration?
So yeah, you're right. Actually, traders and residents in Stourbridge will probably say, "Oh, it's tough for us as well." But I do actually think you have got relatively a very strong high street. Indeed, you'd almost call it a pre-pandemic, a thriving high street. I actually used it as a backdrop for a video I did for the whole subject, because you've got a real gem there that needs to be cherished. But to answer your question, I think there's probably 3 quick points. The first of all is, what can the government do to support high streets through the tax arrangements? And I was vociferous in lobbying pre the budget for the extension of the business rate holiday, the extension of the VAT discounts on some high street operators. So that's really important. The second thing is the whole question about what is going to happen as we sort of emerge from lockdown, because that's a dangerous time for businesses as well. And so there, similarly, we'll be talking about the cash loans that people have had. How can they be made longest possible terms to pay them back? What can we do to drive marketing campaigns to actually get people to come back to the high street? But then thirdly, there's the longer term things, what we're going to do. And there will be slightly lesser retail, certainly in our big town centres, maybe not in our immediate local parades, because actually the pandemic has been kind to those local areas because people really want to shop locally. So that's positive. But in terms of high streets, there will be slightly less retail. So we've got to think about what we're going to do to encourage residential in our town centres, what we're going to do to encourage people to start sort of incubator places, people where small businesses can be set up. And of course, what can we do to bring public services into our town centres? An interesting debate about the police station, for example, or the police presence, for example, in the middle of Stourbridge. So we've got to think about concentrating everything that will bring footflow back into the town centres. And I'm determined to do exactly that. And of course, we've put our money where our mouth is in big way in its Dudley town centre rather than Stourbridge, if I'm allowed to say that on your patch, where obviously our metro extension into the town centre in Dudley has actually been the catalyst for about £1 billion of investment in Dudley town centre. And it's a fascinating example how if we put the infrastructure down, then private sector developers will come on the back of it as well. And there's a sort of model there that we must think about as well.
Yeah, and don't forget on that, Andy, my Stourbridge Dasher, you've been a big supporter for that and helping us on the Restoring Your Railway Fund, which will hopefully link Stourbridge with the Metro, and we'll hopefully get some announcements on that in the summer. But don't forget, but thank you for that, Andy. You've been really, really helpful in putting
Let me just come back on that one, Suzanne. So I want to do it in front of your residents. You have my word. I will support you down the line, because it's a very down the line, if that's not a terrible pun. Because there's an obvious point here, isn't there? That obviously we're going to build the Metro to Brierley Hill and the money's done, but diggers are in the ground. And then the Brierley Hill to Stourbridge connection is the bit that then will complete the network. And I've given an absolute commitment with Suzanne. It will be in my manifesto. Your residents will see it. We will do that. It's just a question of exactly what form. And of course, we've got this wonderful bid around the Stourbridge Dasher that we both promoted a few cold Saturdays ago.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Andy. And talking about sometime in the last year, it's been a long year amid a global pandemic. And I know I've had a conversation with you, and you asked me what are the big issues that I'll be facing in Stourbridge, and because obviously the economy has notably been struggling, and I said to you it was jobs, and I'm sure Boris took that from me in terms of the slogan. But what regional actions have been taken on jobs investment?
So let's probably worth just giving your residents a bit of the big picture here, because it's I think it's fascinating actually. Then we'll come to the specifics that we're acting on. So pre the pandemic, we were actually doing pretty well as a region on jobs. In the first 3 years I was mayor, we actually saw an increase in jobs of 97,000. So that was going some actually. And we actually had a record level of employment just before the pandemic struck. So, of course, that was encouraging. Pandemic came and we've actually lost about 95,000 jobs. So in simple language, we lost all that we gained in the previous 3 years. And when you put it like that, it's heartbreaking, really, because that's people's livelihoods, it's their opportunities. So we're in a tough situation. So what I've said against that is we have got to have a really clear plan for jobs. And I put my plan for jobs together a few weeks ago. And if the moderator wouldn't mind, if you put the link to that in the chat, then anyone who's really interested can see all the detail. And that plan talks about 100,000 new jobs, or minimum of 100,000 new jobs in just 2 years. So that would be the best growth in job numbers we've ever seen. But the critical thing about that plan is it's not about fantasy. And, you know, if only the government would do this, they dig us out of a hole. This is about things we can see really clearly right now. And so, and just a number of the headlines, all the details there, and it says for each project, how many jobs will come. Some of the biggest, the construction jobs are very important around HS2, around the Commonwealth Games, for example. So HS2 alone, we're looking for about 7,000 jobs in the West Midlands over the next 2 years. It's the biggest infrastructure project anywhere in Europe. I've got to make sure those jobs come to the West Midlands. And that's why, for example, we did a big event for SMEs to meet the main HS2 contractors to get SMEs in the Black Country to get those jobs. Then, of course, there's thinking about some of the sectors that are going to grow much faster on the back of what's happened. So there are definitely jobs in the new green economy. And of course, the sort of standout there is the electrification of the automotive industry, so important for us. And although the main part of that, we talk about the gigafactory in Coventry, is a long way away from Stourbridge, that will protect the automotive industry across the whole region, because it will make sure that we become the centre of that electrified industry. So there's new industries like that. But then there's some very practical stuff about, okay, well, where are jobs being created right now? In health and social care. So one of my responsibilities is to make sure we're doing the training through our colleges so people can move into those new jobs there. And of course, another sector like that is the digital economy, where what we're doing is this big piece around, we call it digital boot camps, retraining people. And it was nice that the Prime Minister actually called it out as the pioneering work, the sort of exemplar for the whole country, where people who've perhaps fallen out of, I don't know, retail or hospitality, there's an opportunity to move into a sector that's growing. So lots of examples, but the mega point is we have a plan for getting back those jobs that we have lost, and we will work on it in a properly funded way until we achieve that.
Thank you, Andy. And I've got a question from Tom Warner, which links in very nicely for this. It says, what is the future for backing of electrical apprenticeships in the West Midlands?
Well, it's a great question, Tom, and there's hot news on it, actually. So I said earlier on that this whole electrification of the automotive industry is critical. And so taking it right to the training around that at the other end of it, we've actually just launched with Wolverhampton College a new scheme, 720 places on it, a new almost like faculty, which is training electric vehicle mechanics. Because just to give you the statistic, only 3% of our mechanics can actually maintain an electric vehicle. If we're all heading that way, there's new opportunities. And it's a lovely example of what I'm talking about, where we try to find new opportunities and say, we're going to train our people into those roles. On apprenticeships more generally, if that's what you meant, obviously, like everywhere else in the country, we've seen a reduction in the number of apprentices this year. What we're trying to do is to make sure we've got unique regional funding to actually stretch that role of apprentices going back. It was going very well pre-pandemic, but we've had a hit. And the way we do this, and this is uniquely in the West Midlands, big companies can spend their apprenticeship levy, put it into a pot, which we keep here, and we actually use that to bring apprentices in small and medium-sized enterprises. So if you are a SME and would like to take on an apprenticeship but can't fund it, Combined Authority might be able to assist you with that. Or if you're a big company with unspent levy, we certainly want to hear from you, because we put it into that pot to retain it here. So just perhaps a couple of very practical examples of what we're doing uniquely in the West Midlands, Tom, on your question.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That was a really good question. The next question I have, and apologies if I don't pronounce your surname correctly, but it's from Mohammed Muzaman. The question is, we are working from home during the lockdown. What is your creative plan to offer jobs for the young offenders in this digital world?
For young offenders, I'm not quite sure what that's got to do with working from home, Mohammed. So, okay, so let's just go back to I don't know what the working from home bit has got to do with it, but let's be clear about young offenders. We've actually done a couple of trial schemes with our colleges. I will admit it's predominantly in Birmingham, not in the Black Country, where we've actually put programs together, particularly for those either at risk of offending or coming back from offending. So we've done that directly with colleges. And what we've also done is we've put together this sort of specialist unit, which is called the Violence Reduction Unit, which is a collaboration between the Police and Crime Commissioner, myself, and central government, actually. And it's pretty well funded, actually. And each job is to put in place programs specifically to address those at risk of offending or risk of violent crime in particular, hence the Violent Reduction Unit. And it was a specific response to the escalation of knife crime at the beginning of 2019. And we know the West Midlands was badly affected by that. One of the things I'm pleased about, when that happened, I was straight on to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, at the time, saying, "You've got to fund this, Philip," and they have done. They put about £7 million over the last couple of financial years into it, and there is that new resource, and there are specific schemes. So I'm not quite sure why you asked the question, but if you're, for example, someone who's got responsibility for someone in that category, you can look at the Violence Reduction Unit under West Midlands Police, and you will see that there are particular activities there for those at risk of being involved in violent crime.
Brilliant, thanks, Andy. Yeah, and Mohammed, if misinterpreted the question from the chat, please just put back in the chat and to ensure we have answered it as you would wish. We have got another question from Tom, and I personally do like these. I hope everyone else does too. I'm not sure why they wouldn't. He says, I installed electric car chargers, and what is the future for rapid electric car chargers in the West Midlands? It's very limited at the moment. Yeah,
Tom, this is a brilliant question. And Suzanne and I both said at the beginning, I will be honest if I don't feel we're making progress. So far, the things we've been asked, we are making a bit of progress. This one, we're not making good enough progress. You are right, Tom. And this is really frustrating, because we want to move to the electrification of the industry, and we've talked about it in other ways. And better charging infrastructure would help customers turn to electric vehicles. And if I'm very honest, I'm slightly perplexed as to why government isn't moving faster on this. So what is already happening, I know Tom will know this, but others might not. There is a pretty limited scheme run by our local authorities, and you might just call it like almost sort of low-level sort of on-street charging, and that's good. I'm not taking anything away from it. But to really transform this, we do, as Tom said, need rapid chargers at like high-density points. Now, the government actually have a fund that through the Office of Low Emission Vehicles. However, they have, and there's £1 billion set aside for this from government, but thus far they have not allocated any of this money. And the reason this is frustrating is we've actually put a proposal together in the West Midlands, combination of the combined authority and actual private business, saying we can make a business model out of this, but we need some public money, government money, to kickstart it. And so far, we nor anybody else, frankly, has got any of that money out of government to do this. But Tom, you are absolutely right. We've got to win that argument, because we're not going to get the public adoption of this if we don't. The encouraging thing is we are ready with the proposal. We know how to get private money leveraged into this, but thus far, I regret to say, we've not been successful. So, if you could encourage anyone in government, please do. If you have contacts on this subject.
Thank you. And Tom, you're not the only one asking that question. It has filled my inbox at times. So thank you. Another question is about the homeless people. There are always homeless people outside the Rye Market and in the underpass. And what is being done to help these people?
Yeah. So I'm going to chance my arm now, and someone might say no. I hope that you've seen a lot less rough sleepers on the streets over the last year than previously, because that's certainly what all of the research and the data would say, actually. So I'll just give you the background here and tell you exactly what we're doing. So this was a real problem. I absolutely accept. And oddly enough, when I stood for election back in 2017, every single event I went to, people would say to me, what about the rough sleepers? And I came away from that election utterly determined to do something about it. Although technically, it's actually not clear whose responsibility it was. But actually, I was determined personally to do something about it as the leader of the region, and we have. And what we've actually seen is a massive reduction in the number of people who are rough sleeping. The number's actually gone down by 75% in 2 years in the West Midlands, and that's the fastest reduction anywhere. And at the last, and I hate the word, but I have to use it because everybody does, at the last count of rough sleepers, there were 44 left on the streets of the West Midlands. That's 75% down from where we were, 44 across the whole region. 44 too many, I accept, but a huge improvement. And the single biggest reason we'd had that improvement is we've been able to really make our main scheme work. And the main scheme is a scheme called Housing First. And it was designed to take people who were rough sleeping or maybe just about to move to rough sleeping if all else had failed, and give them a home of their own. Now, let's be clear, it's not a grand home. It's probably a room in shared accommodation or maybe a small flat, but it is somewhere where you close the door at night and you say, this is mine. I can rebuild my life from here. And what you also had was support from a worker for whatever underlying issue you might have had, whether it be mental health, addiction, or whatever. And so far, 377 people have moved into that scheme. So we've got 44 left on the streets, 377 have moved into that scheme. And that's why I started by saying, I genuinely hope that you've seen a lot less in Stourbridge now. The actual number we had at the count for Dudley, the whole of Dudley Borough last year, I think was 4. So hopefully you would agree that we've made real progress on that.
Andy, you've made tremendous progress on it, and at times during the pandemic when we could, we did go out and check the underpass being very close to my office. And I'm thankful to say that they were offered shelter. There's a lovely group called Leslie Care Packages. She does some fantastic work also for the homeless, and I think she can concur also that some really excellent work was done to ensure, one, they were safe from COVID-19, and also they had the shelter. So thank you for that. So the next question we have, now this one, when I became an MP in Stourbridge, one thing I noticed was some fantastic buildings, the architecture of these buildings, but a lot of them are actually derelict, but there's lots of potential. How can you help ensure that these buildings are put to good use in our community?
So, okay, so are these, let's call it town centre? I mean, you do in Stourbridge have some beautiful old town centre buildings. So I think the best example of this is just to tell you where I've just come from, and it might spark an idea actually. So I can't just step in and take over every building and suddenly magic it back to life. We need somebody either who owns it or who is prepared to take it over to do that. But I will just give you the example of where I've just been, because I think it will be, actually might spark some brilliant thoughts. I've just been in Erdington in Birmingham, morning in Stourbridge, afternoon in Erdington, and we were looking at the old swimming baths, which is a beautiful old, I guess, Edwardian building, but it's, which Suzanne will know given her previous life. And it's not had anything going on in it for, I don't know, 10 years. after the council built a new leisure centre there. And you just sort of think, why on earth? The project was to build a new leisure centre, but surely also it was to think about the use of the old building. And what we've actually come up with is a proposal with a local community association to turn it into a business support incubator hub for startups to be based. And they've actually just put in an application to the Combined Authority for funding to help in the renovation of it. And it's justified, because we have to justify the public expenditure on the basis of the jobs that it will support. So the reason I go through that is it's a really practical example of if there is a new use with, let's say, a community association, then it would satisfy the criteria for our public expenditure. So I'd be very happy to look at anything like that. In different cases, we might have actually worked to help bring, to support heritage lottery applications, or to bring in Arts Council grants or whatever. So there are different ways in which it can be done. We've also, in example, in Coventry, actually done a lovely scheme at an old traditional abbey, which, believe it or not, is in the on the main London road out of Coventry. We've put CA money directly in to a historic trust that's bringing that back to life. So there are different ways in which those things can be done. If you mean a very ugly office block that shouldn't really ever have been there, and the whole site is going to be redeveloped, I'll give you an example much closer to home in Dudley. We paid directly for the demolition of Cavendish House, that ghastly thing on the just by Duncan Edwards Way as you drive through Dudley. We paid to get that knocked down, frankly, and that then clears the site for a redevelopment, and that's now come good. And I frankly don't think that redevelopment of Dudley would have come good if we hadn't paid for that. So depending on what the building is and the ownership structure, we can then find an appropriate way forward. But I think some private sector person or community organisation or historic trust or something has got to say, we've got a proposal. And sometimes it needs someone to nudge the vacant landlord to come forward with that proposal. And of course, there's one last thing the Combined Authority can do. And this does happen sometimes. If the landlord is sitting on a precious place and not doing anything with it, we can threaten compulsory purchase of that. And a really good example of that, we had to do that actually with the building adjacent to the Grand Theatre in Wolverhampton. Wonderful opportunity. And we actually never had to use the compulsory purchase power, but the very fact we said we were doing it then drove a redevelopment, and the Grand have now got an expansion scheme. So from different parts of the conurbation, different examples of what we can do, but it needs a proposal, Suzanne, to come forward from the local organisation.
Oh, fantastic. And I think also it links to what you're saying about private investment. But I think this question also links to the work I've been doing with Jay Singh Sohal, who obviously is the candidate for the Police and Crime Commissioner. And we've got an old building, the Citizens Advice Bureau building. And again, it's about repurposing. And we've been working very hard and having conversations about turning that back into, well, turning it into police station in Stourbridge, and I know a location is being sought and looked at, but I think it's those kind of conversations as well that I as local MP needs to be having. So we're actually repurposing those buildings, and I know many would really welcome a presence again actually on a high street for the police station.
Just let me interrupt you, Suzanne, very rude of me. I've been and seen the building you're referring to. This is Old Citizens Advice building on Stout. It's not actually on the high street, it's on the adjacent road, isn't it? Yeah. And I mean, it would make a wonderful front police presence, and Stourbridge needs that. And let's just be clear, I think the current position of closing all of these police stations across the region is just so counterproductive. Policing needs to be forward in our communities. And so I wish you all good fortune with Jay on bringing that, or bringing something back to life.
All right, thank you. And we have now a question from Lambros Viennas. It's quite a long question, but bear with me, it's a good question. The news for investing towards a dense network of rapid charges is the way forward. And if I'm allowed to say, an excellent strategic decision. Are there similar plans to strengthen the digital communication infrastructure, given the trend towards working from home, as well as Industry 4 evolution?
Brilliant question. So yes is the answer. Now, whatever I say in the next minute somebody's going to say, it's not like that with me. I can't even get 3G. It's terrible, and a genuine offer. If you do live in a not spot, as it's called, please send your details in, because the companies that provide the 4G service have said to me, we just sometimes need to know, and we need to sort of group up properties together, and we're happy to do that. We're happy to hear from you. So it's not an absolute commitment to actually get it solved, but I am more than happy, and I've done this occasionally, to actually put reports through to the companies like Openreach, like City Fibre, depending exactly who's working in your area, to improve that. But the next big thing, of course, will be this 5G piece. And the really exciting news is that the West Midlands is leading in 5G. And I don't know, Lambros, what business you are in, but you could well be in a business where the quality of that link is absolutely critical. And the whole idea of 5G, if anyone doesn't know, it's built on slightly different technology. So it means that there's no sort of problems with the signal falling out, a delay. It's real time, real high quality. So if you have that, you can then, if you're like an architect, you could send your drawings immediately. If you were doing something, I don't know, in creativity, you could send your video of what you've done. It's some fantastic different applications. And the West Midlands won 2 years ago the competition to be the big test bed, national test bed for this. And we had some data recently which said actually the West Midlands is twice as well connected as London in this new technology. And that is pretty stunning statement, actually. So we are right on the edge of that. And we're now beginning really to explore how it can be applied to businesses. And we've launched one in Wolverhampton, one in Birmingham, one in Coventry, what we call an accelerator for this 5G, where small businesses can go and understand with the physical people in that build, in those accelerators, how this might actually change their business. And I've already seen legion of examples of where that is happening. My probably best example of all, because I just love it, it's so on message at the moment, is a doctor's surgery who adopted this, very early adopters of the tech, and were using the reliable 5G images to actually do patient consultations in a care home during the pandemic. They didn't need to go into the care home with all that involved, but the quality of the image was good enough to do the diagnosis from their surgery. And when I saw that, I thought, that is sort of breakthrough. So I hope people will think, yeah, we are on the edge of something really important there, actually. So yeah, I'm really pleased we've got that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lambros. That's a great question. Can I just say that's a fantastic name as well, Lambros Viennas. I do like that.
Yeah.
Now this is a question, actually, it's something I think has been much talked about, and it's about, why do you think there is a lower uptake in the vaccination take-up in the BAME communities?
What an interesting question. There is a low uptake, let's not beat about the bush, and I think it's been good that we've been honest about it, because then we can address it. So I think it's the word I think best describes it, and it sounds a very politically correct word, but I think it's right. People talk about hesitancy, and I think that describes it very well from what I've come across. And by the way, I've done round tables with all sorts of religious groups and different ethnic groups as well. So when I say ethnic, I mean we did a group particularly for the African community, where the rates are the lowest of all, actually. We've done things with faith leaders, and we've done obvious things with the different CCGs. So I've got myself quite stuck into this. And what I've discovered is there's no philosophical reason against in any faith community. The leaders of every single faith in the West Midlands are saying, you must do this. There's no outright opposition in any ethnic group. It's much more that there are just a lot more people in the different minority communities than the white majority community who are just uncertain, need reassurance, need persuasion. So it might be about, what are the side effects, the questions. It might be about what's in the vaccine. There's a lot of concern about that, particularly in some communities who don't have any animal products in anything. There's been a lot to do there. There's been a lot of questions about the impacts around fertility as well. So my read of it is there's no one overwhelming thing stopping it. It just needs an enormous amount of talking persuasion. And the encouraging thing is actually that the gaps between the white community and others are beginning to close as all this persuasion and talk is paying off. And I think we will steadily see that close. And there's been some brilliant work by role models. We've seen our faith leaders getting out there. We've seen African and Caribbean doctors from the health service getting out there telling the story. We've seen sort of cultural heroes from the West Midlands, from the Muslim community getting out there and telling the story. So there have been some brilliant things, Suzanne, and I do think they are beginning to make the difference.
I do as well, and I think it's for all of us who've had the vaccine to sort of tell the story of how important it is and how simple it is to have the jab, and the side effects are just minor. The most important thing is to keep us and our families all safe and to keep protecting the NHS, obviously. So if anyone out there has had the vaccine, please do keep saying that it's really important for us all to have the jab. Now, I've got a question here from Thomas Loughborough, who I think is a familiar name to both of us.
Yes, he is. Good evening, Thomas.
And his question, hi, Thomas. And the question is, how will you improve transport connectivity in the Black Country after the pandemic?
After the pandemic, okay. So, well, Thomas, that's a kind question, because there's a mountain to answer. So I think it's probably worth saying, first of all, the single biggest transport investment we're making in the Black Country is the metro from Wednesbury through Sandwell to Dudley Town Centre and then to Brierley Hill. And let's just talk a little bit about that, because people have talked about that metro link for 30 years and nothing happened. And I was utterly determined in my last manifesto to make it happen. And therefore, really clearly, as soon as I was elected, I was straight down to London, meet the Transport Secretary. And in the December of that first year, I ended up sitting in the Chancellor's office I'm basically saying, I'm not going until I get the money for this. And Philip Hammond said, fair enough, Andy. And we got it. And the nice thing is the diggers are in the ground. We know the new trams are already ordered for the extension. It's going to happen. And most importantly, then we're seeing the investment in Dudley on the back of that certainty of that coming. This will be the first time that Dudley will have been connected to the main transport network. So that's obviously the big thing. There are other proper heavy railway lines that are opening. And we've just got the absolute certainty last week that Walsall-Wolverhampton will return to a passenger service connecting those two Black Country towns. And then we've also talked about new railways coming in the future. We've talked about Tettenhall Station, for example, and I've given a firm commitment, it will be in the manifesto, music to Suzanne's ears, the Stourbridge to Brierley Hill link as well. But then we've also got to think about our bus services. And the good thing on that is, remember, for 4 years, we've had bus fares frozen. That's never been achieved before in the West Midlands. And that really matters to people who have no alternative but to use the bus. Brilliant. And we were beginning to see patronage on the bus come up as a consequence of that. And again, sharp contrast to everything around the country. And one of the other reasons we were seeing that is National Express were investing in really good state-of-the-art vehicles. If you think of the vehicles running on the number 9 into Stourbridge, that is a beautiful vehicle, as good as any bus anywhere in the country. And we've given a commitment that all vehicles will be made clean in the West Midlands, replacing any old vehicles as well. So good investment there. And actually picking out a particular thing, it's not Stourbridge, it's Walsall. We will be running our first hydrogen buses on the service to Walsall as well. So lots of things, Suzanne, all happening in the Black Country. Lisa?
Yes.
I think we might just have lost Suzanne.
I'll get in touch with her. Give me 1 minute.
And of course, I can't see. So to people on the line, just so you know, I can't see the questions, so I can't call out the next one. I'm sorry.
Okay, I will read the next question for you, Andy.
Thank you.
For Suzanne. So we've got a question again from Mohammed, and he says, mental health issues may increase during lockdown, but any necessary action plans to keep the issue under control in the West Midlands? So what are you doing for?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for stepping in. And there's the proof that I don't know what's coming. So, okay, Thank you, Mohammed. A very important question. So mental health issues have increased during the pandemic in the West Midlands. So there's a couple of things to say about this. The first thing to say was right at the beginning of the pandemic, what we did, because the Combined Authority has had very well regarded mental health work for particularly thinking about managing health in the workplace. So the first, all under the branding Thrive. And what we did right at the beginning was make all the materials we use for the workplace available for home working. So managing your mental health at home, and we call it Thrive at Work, all available on our website. You know, sound so simple, just to convert the traditional stuff for home working, but that was done and really good response. But perhaps more far-reaching, and I'm really pleased with this. We've had a particular programme for the Black Country, not Birmingham, not Coventry, for getting people with really big mental health challenges into work, and we called it Thrive into Work. And what we actually did was we worked with individuals to give them the sort of preparation work for getting into work. And I think we got, I'm just trying to get this right, I think it was 600 people suffering from mental health conditions into work over the last year. And on the back of that, we've just been awarded new funding from government, actually, for a target of 1,500 people, particularly for the Black Country again, for mental health condition sufferers into work. So actually, you know what? I'm really pleased that out of adversity, we put something very different together, and we got that done. And then the last sort of part of it, we also do what we call Thrive in Work. So we've been working with lots of businesses, and we do a little award ceremony for them all and all that to really encourage best practice to think about how people can best manage the mental health of all of their employees. And we've had some brilliant things from the NHS itself doing that to small manufacturing companies. So Mohammed, it's a great question, and we've really tried to step in some practical ways, not in any way though, cutting across the main responsibility of the Mental Health NHS Trust, who obviously have their statutory responsibilities there. Hope that answers, Mohammed.
Great. Yeah, I know Suzanne's just having some internet problems, but she's trying to figure that out. So we've got another question. I know that this is something that residents feel quite strongly about in Stourbridge. So yeah. Parking is a big issue for most residents, especially in the Old Quarter. What can be done to ensure that there is enough safe parking in the town centre?
So it's a shame Suzanne's not on the line, because this one, it's the first time I've said this all evening, this one is much more a local issue than a mayoral issue. I'll give you my view, and that is obviously that, and I can imagine in the beautiful Old Quarter how difficult this would be. And the answer has to be restrictions around residents' parking. Now, I suspect that the council have already done that in a lot of the area. So I'm struggling to think why that isn't proving the necessary solution. But if it's not, then the whole question of the extent of residents' parking is obviously what needs to be viewed. But I'm sorry to say this, it's more of a local issue than a mayoral issue, actually.
Back.
Aha, brilliant.
Apologies.
Don't worry. Well, Lisa Busk, she asked me two questions. One was about mental health issues, which was very relevant to my role. The second one, for the first time tonight, Suzanne, I had to say was more of a local issue. The question was about residents parking in the Old Quarter.
Okay.
So, yeah, so I don't know. So I know I didn't give a very good answer to that, but that it's fundamentally because it's not something I have direct responsibility over.
It isn't, and if you'd like to contact my office, we can put my email actually in the chat. It's something we can put through to the Dudley Borough Council and ask the question if there's anything we can do around there. I think the more the cars are on the road and more people have 1-2 cars, it is starting to become a bit of an issue, and people do ask these questions. So send it through to us and let's just see what we can do. I didn't hear the context of the question, but just send it through. Now, the one question before I left was from a Lorraine Northway, and again, it was about Greenbelt. Now, I can talk about Greenbelt forever, and I think this is a really good question for you, Andy, as well. It's basically saying, just trying to see if policy change can make developers lead to brownfield reclamation instead of then Greenbelt field option? So basically, can we make sure that developers do Brownfield first?
So I think we're proving that already. It's a very interesting question. So I think I said earlier on, let's put this bluntly, a developer given a choice between a beautiful greenfield site, let's say the wonderful Foxcut Lane, which I know is much debated as well in your patch, your Foxcut Farm, between that and then thinking about a complex derelict industrial site elsewhere in the patch, you know what they're going to choose, which is easier, you know, which they're probably going to make more money on. So that's what will happen. And that's back to my sort of story of before. We saw huge areas of Birmingham not being redeveloped, but the same council given permission for the Greenbelt or Sutton Coldfield. It was sort of obvious what was happening. So I think, Lorraine, you have put your money on an important thing. And what we've said is, no, we're not going to give permission for the Greenbelt. Therefore, developer, if you want to meet the demand here, you're going to have to work on the brownfield sites. And what's been really, really encouraging is because we have supported them, you could say made brownfield easy for them, developers have come forward to do exactly what we want. And that's actually very, very encouraging.
I think Suzanne's internet's gone again. So
oh dear.
Question.
She will be frustrated, but there we are. I hope that answers, Lorraine. And let's go to the next question, Lisa, if you can.
Yes, so the next question is, how much of the Longland site, which is currently being developed, will be affordable for local residents?
Now, I'm not actually sure about this because I'm not sure if the WMCA has put funding into this or not. But let me tell you the principle of this. Any scheme that the WMCA puts funds into, the minimum affordable is 20%. Now, often local authorities do not achieve 20%, but we have been absolutely adamant. If you do not achieve that, we're not putting any funding in. And again, probably partly the consequence of that, the number of affordable homes built in the West Midlands has increased from 2,500 to 5,000 over the last, I can't remember if it's 4 or 5 year period actually. So we've seen a doubling of affordable with a doubling of the total. So really encouraging. Now the other detail on this, which I think the questioner will be very interested in, we've also changed the definition of what an affordable home is in the West Midlands. And this is unique to the West Midlands. And I think it's a really important piece of progress because sometimes affordable isn't really affordable because nationally they define affordable as a proportion of the market price of property. But it frankly has nothing to do with what people are earning. What we've done is said affordable should be related to people's earnings, and broadly you should be able to afford it with a third of your monthly salary, whether you're either paying rent or a mortgage. Now the good thing is, having made that change, again we've not allocated funding unless people can satisfy that, and once again people have satisfied it. So we have really tried, to the questioner, I forgot, my apologies, I've forgotten the surname, first name, sorry. We've really tried to make sure that we can both drive up the total affordable and make it genuinely affordable, for example, for people on normal salaries. So that's what we've tried to do. But I can't actually remember if the Longland site is subject to all of that or not. We can check that one up for you with pleasure afterwards.
Great, thanks, Andy. So the next question is about the high street. So how can we encourage people to go back to spending in the high street after the pandemic?
Yeah. Important. 3 things. First of all, get people to believe it's safe. That's probably the most important thing of all. So if we continue to make progress with the roadmap, and obviously we continue to make progress with the infection rates, which we have done brilliantly, and obviously the vaccination programme plays a critical role in that, that will build confidence faster than anything else. The second thing we can do is actually a bit of work around marketing. I'm expecting to see promotional campaigns for our town centres. And actually the government put some money on the table earlier this week to encourage those from local authorities. So that whole sort of, well, let's be honest, the Eat Out to Help Out last summer, the jury's out as to whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, frankly. But it certainly encouraged behaviour change. So we know that we can encourage things with marketing. Then the third thing is, I'm hoping, for example, public transport's very important for going back to our towns and cities. We'll get the whole notion of, yeah, it's okay to use public transport again. And particularly for more elderly people, that's really critical as well. And you never know, we might even think about some promotional activities on our public transport as well. So health, marketing, transport.
Great. So the next question says, how would you balance the issues of Birmingham with those of the Black Country, so not becoming a city-centric mayor?
Good question. Thank you for asking, because I actually think that I've done exactly that. And I do know that there was a real risk of the Mayor of the West Midlands being the surrogate mayor of Birmingham when this post was created. But I think we have totally avoided that. And I'm very pleased for people to look where have we spent the money, where have we done the lobbying for, and it's not about central Birmingham. Obviously, central Birmingham's got a critical part for the economy of the region. We all understand that. But if you look at actually where money's been spent, I promise you, more has been spent per head of population in Dudley than in Birmingham. More has been spent in Sandwell per head of population than in Birmingham. So, and indeed, Birmingham would say they've actually had a bit of a rum deal. So I'm very happy for my actions to be examined on this. The cash has been spread broadly, and actually per head, Dudley has had a good amount of the cash. It says Suzanne's coming back on my screen, but maybe not just yet. Okay, there we are. You are back. Lovely. How frustrating for you. Anyway, we've had, I think, 3 questions while you've been off this time.
Brilliant.
How do I not become a mayor of Birmingham? So I hope we answered that pretty robustly. Then another one about town centres, and as it was some time ago, I can't remember the first one.
Okay, so I think her internet has gone again.
Oh dear. Go on, have you got any more questions?
So I think this will be the last question, and hopefully Suzanne can join again, but if not, yeah, we'll finish with this. So
okay,
what is being done to help over 50s who have lost their jobs during the pandemic get back into work?
Yeah, okay. Another really important question. So having said it's important, just let me tell you one piece of data to keep this in perspective. We had the data today about the proportion of people who lost their job of different age groups. And I'm pretty sure I've remembered it exactly right, because it was shocking, actually. 88% of the people who've lost their jobs, it said, were under 35. So it is definitely true that this has been worst affected for the youngsters. But interestingly, the next age group are the most mature workers, the over 50s. So the questioner is right. And the critical thing that we are doing is basically saying those retraining schemes are available for everybody, and more mature people are particularly welcome. So people might say, no, I don't want to go and learn something completely different. But it's been interesting, actually. We've had very mature people come on to the digital retraining, and it's actually given people a new sort of a new opportunity, a new skill. So that's there. But the most important thing to say is every one of our adult education opportunities, and we do spend 130 million on that a year, they are all available to the more mature groups in the workforce. And, you know, in a sense, I want them particularly to be highlighted to those mature groups, because I do understand there's been an issue, a big issue there, and we need to give those people an opportunity to retrain should they wish to. So that's what's available.
Perfect. So I don't think Suzanne's going to be able to join now, but that's the end of the questions that we've got.
You've done all the questions. I can't believe it. So, well, can I just say, I usually let the host, the local MP, summarise, but perhaps I should step in as Suzanne's not on the call, just to say thank you for the questions. Incredible range and breadth, and I hope I've done my best to answer them, but and I hope the conclusion that people will have is that although we've got an enormous challenge, no one would disagree with that, we've got some very clear positions and some clear plans which will help us grow back and bounce back. But thank you all for your part in tonight, because very nearly an hour of politics is more than enough for anybody. So I really do appreciate your participation. Thank you very much and good night.